the end of the day, all the training we do is to actually make our technical and our competition performance better. So again, let's think about what we're trying to achieve. We want an athletically straight leg on landing. We see a minimum knee bend up to perhaps 25 degrees, depending on which end of the spectrum you are as a jumper, whether you're the Sotomayor or the Costa Dinova. The contact time, in training terms, I would suggest should be equal or less than that you experience in the competition, in the ultimate performance arena. And again, we want strong posture, we want stiffness in the activity. So those things we need to hold in our head as we're looking at what we're doing in training. As far as the specificity of the exercises we're going to use, we remember how much knee bend there is, we remember the contact time that we have in the high jump takeoff, and we take those as their implications for what we actually do in training. Now, the question we ask ourselves is, do we do two-footed exercises, a symmetrical loading, because it's easier to actually tolerate, or do we think, well, actually, high jump is a one-legged event. There's asymmetrical loadings in. Now, which is going to be more intense? I would suggest this is more intense on the body. Do we actually go straight to the more specific technical type of exercise and build the loadings up, or do we actually do a more general thing? Now, this goes back to Graham's pyramid and some of the stuff that Lauren was talking about this morning. If we look at athletes, this athlete here was doing the little 2-foot bounce and recoil drill that we all do, and what we actually find is after 800ths of a second, this athlete normally took off in 1600ths of a second. That was a competition takeoff time. 800ths of a second was the maximum knee bend. That's the end of the eccentric. She'd actually got 137 degrees of knee flexion. She'd only bent the knee 12 degrees. When we do work over hurdles, do we do tuck jumps over hurdles? How relevant is that to the technique we're trying to achieve in the high jump? Or is this the position we're trying to get when we leave the ground? Little 9-inch hurdles. If we, as some people, and this is the inappropriateness you sometimes see, if we jump off bigger boxes, 75 centimeters in this case, how much knee flexion is the athlete going to get to be able to absorb that load, even when they're jumping onto something that's only 20 centimeters high? 128 degrees. Can the athlete jump from this position? Well, actually, this young lady can, and it's something over a number of years I've tried to get rid of, because she would be more effective if she can actually maintain the stiffness that we see in an athlete like this, or the Costa Dinovas. And again, if you have access to Quintic, Silicon Coach, or in fact, somebody told me yesterday there's actually a free motion analysis tool on the web, and when I found out what it is, I'll email you the contact, because it'll save you several £100s. I'm able to analyse actually what happens with an athlete. You can see things, you can be fairly accurate on, with your coaching eye, you very quickly pick up whether or not, when you flex, whether there's a stick in there or whether it is explosive. But look at the numbers. 600ths of a second in, the athlete is at maximum knee bend. You see the angle change through the knee, but the angle change through the hip hasn't really altered. So that's telling me this athlete was quite fixed in the midsection when they were hurdle jumping. At 800ths of a second, there hasn't been any angle change, so for 200ths of a second, they're stuck there. Now, with the Casio high-speed camera, I can be more precise. This was done with video, de-interlaced video, 200ths of a second. That was the most precise timing increment I could work to. So in fact, it might be slightly less than 200ths if I was able to measure more precisely. And at 1400ths of a second, that athlete left the ground. That athlete did always have a very fast takeoff, so fast that I felt they never really achieved the full maximum power in their jump. The guy's currently our national coach, by the way. At contact, the knee wasn't straight, and this is one of the issues of actually doing hurdle work. If you over anticipate the next part of the movement, you're putting yourself in an anticipatory position. Is this mimicking what we want in an actual takeoff? But again, 14 degrees of bend in 600ths of a second. The thigh angle not changing much. The flexion is at the knee and the ankle. So perhaps this has implications for which muscles we condition to support plyometric activity. And even when you leave the ground, you're not absolutely straight. You cannot completely extend the leg. So most athletes won't get past 170, 174 degrees, but the more you can squeeze out on the concentric through having good fundamental movement control, the more effective you can actually be, I would suggest. Rob Mitchell, a reasonable athlete, best of 225, dropping off a 40 centimetre step, still takes 1800ths of a second to get off the ground again. And again, the angle change is more at the knee, not in the upper body. So the hips are supporting the upper body quite well, the midsection's strong, but the potential weak area or the loading is going through here. And even though the athlete's trying to be aggressive and explode off the ball of the foot, there is still ankle flexion and the heel gets very close to or may actually touch the ground. But even with a relatively good athlete, notice he wasn't dropping off something really high, yet there was still a significant amount of flexion. So if you're trying to work out what's happening with the athlete, because unless you can actually know what you're seeing in front of you, it's very hard to make development or bring about improvement. My suggestion is that you should be always looking for a contact duration of less than 20 hundredths, 0.2 of a second, because beyond that, you're not going to see that timing frame within the high jump itself. How can you measure it? We saw the traces off a force platform. Great if you're in a place like this, you're on lottery funding, you had access to the technology and the technicians. Absolutely. There are timing mats on the contact mats on the market, which allow you to quite quickly measure how long the athlete's on the floor. A couple of £100, a lot less expensive, but can the club afford them? Can you as an individual coach actually invest in them? Perhaps, perhaps not. The Casio high-speed cameras are relatively inexpensive, discounted through England Athletics. People on the national coaching programme, it's a facility we can provide for them. Lets you actually measure quite precisely what's happening. Simply using video. Freeze frame, deinterlace it, and you're getting increments of 0.2 of a second. Freeze frame it on the screen if you can't even get to that, or you have a still picture, put a protractor across it, measure the angles. If all else fails, use your eye. And sometimes if you step back and look through half closed eyes and you actually get the feel of what's happening, was there a flow in the movement, or was there a momentary lapse or a little sticking point? That can tell you if that athlete keeps sticking, maybe the exercise isn't right for them, or I need to do something, give them something to actually help them develop through to the next level. As to what exercise is used for plyometrics, lots of variations. I would suggest that the intensity of those increases. So that might be an easier exercise, that might be a harder exercise. Where do you start the athlete on the continuum, and where do you progress them to at different levels of ability and different stages of maturation?